It's me again.
No, that's not it.
So while that gets up on the screen, what I want to talk about and what the topic, the issue of this conversation is vital documents, the translation of vital documents. I'm going to talk about vital documents and except for the actual translation of these documents. So I'm going to skip the translation part, but I think that what I want to really walk you through is how to get to a point to identify the list of documents that may require translation, and then what to do with them after they're translated. So the title is a bit deceiving. It's not translating vital documents. It's everything but the translation piece. So that's a disclaimer for this conversation. And I hope throughout this conversation and the suggestions that you'll see in the PowerPoint, maybe one of these items will stick and be something that you can take and run with in your offices and agencies. Okay, so right off the bat, it's good to define what it is we're talking about. If we're going to talk about vital documents, we should better get a better sense of what we mean, how we define these terms. We'll break it down to see the definitions on the screen, what vital means. It's pretty straightforward, absolutely necessary, important, essential. And document, of course, is definitions on the screen. So it's an official paper that gives information about something. So those two terms in isolation are pretty straightforward. I think what becomes problematic and a good topic of discussion among a lot of government agencies is once we combine those two words and they become vital documents, everybody goes crazy because everybody has a different definition of what vital documents means, what's vital to me, what's vital to you, what makes the cut, what doesn't make the list. So this is why I left that undefined, and I'll let you define how you want to define vital documents. But I want you to define that after this presentation, because this presentation will talk about certain things to consider in doing so. And like I said, some may stick and some may not, but I think I'd want to give you all options to consider so that you can ultimately get to a point where you have a list just to start talking about. Not to translate. I mean, we can talk about number of languages and cost and all that type of stuff, but let's just worry about how big this universe of documents is, and that can happen today. That conversation can happen Monday. So that's, if you haven't done so, this is a good point to start. So identification of vital documents. I think one of the things that we have found successful and that I share a lot with other city, state, federal agencies in terms of how to get to a point of identifying these things is simply to survey or poll anybody that's in your agency, in your office, in your division, in your department, however you define your structure, is going around knocking on doors. Anybody who produces documentation. I'll talk about the education field because that's where I come from. There is an office that's special education. There's an office for English language learners. There's a parent office. There is a communications office. There is all sorts of different offices, and each one of them does their own creation of publications. Sometimes we know about them, sometimes we don't. But it's good to just go through the drill, the exercise of knocking on these doors and trying to identify what documents do these colleagues of yours produce that may actually end up in the hands of an LEP recipient or LEP individual. So, so the idea is to get a sense of what exists, and you want to identify the documents that are meant for service users. And I want to just take that a bit deeper and identify these documents in two different ways, and this may or may not apply to you. There are some documents that need translation that are informational and that an LEP user could read, have access to, and should have access to give an overview of your program, the services you offer within your agency. Sometimes it's easier to see that, to visualize that. If that's a document you will have on a website that an LEP user can go on at 2 o'clock in the morning, download or visit a website and learn something about the agency or the services you provide. So I'm calling those user-prompted documents. So it's prompted by the user by seeking information. So that's one pot of documents. The other part of documents that may or may not apply to you, but it probably does, is what I've defined as agency-prompted documents. And what I mean by that is that you want to have these certain documents translated in case you have to go a certain route or roll out a certain process or there is an appeal process. You're not going to have these documents posted on the website because the LEP user, or even the English-speaking user, will never know what to use or when to use it, or when this document goes into play. It'll be you, as the content owner, the owner of the service, the one that knows what processes are in place, will know to pull out Form 21573 because it applies to whatever's going on at that particular moment with the LEP individual. So that's what I'm calling agency-prompted document, and I make that distinction because one, you should make available, publicly available, easily accessible to everybody. And the other one you should probably keep in your back pocket and just pull it out when you need it, but you still need it translated. Okay, so this is why I define that as a type of document that will need ultimately translation one way or the other. The other points that you want to accomplish by identifying and polling or surveying the divisions within your agency is to identify who owns them. In many cases, there are documents floating around, and we simply don't know where they come from, who owns them, where they live. Is there a source file you can get your hands on? You could also take a look at what's the most recent version. I've had experiences where I've seen two different versions of a particular registration form, slightly different, both versions being used because someone didn't know that it had been updated last month, and the update was critical because it's now asking for a certain piece of information from the LEP user or just anybody, individual who needs the service. So all this is important to just start to compile this information to see what's out there. So just to recap, identify the documents that are meant for service users, identify who owns them, where they live, if you can find them, and make sure that you have the most recent version of the document accessible so that when you are ready to go in translation, you're working with the most recent version and you're not working with a document that's outdated, because you don't want that.
This conference appears to be inactive and will be ended soon.
That's not me.
If you are the host and wish this conference to continue, please press any key on your telephone
louder
touchpad.
and louder. We good? Are we done? We good? Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're collecting this information. We talked about documents and so forth. The other thing you want to, in this process of collecting this information, and this is to prep for potential translation down the road, you might as well also start collecting the length of these documents, whether they're a page count or a word count. For the translation world, the word count is probably a little more critical. But a page count also gives you a sense of how big the document is. So it wouldn't hurt to collect that information in this surveying process. So you're collecting the length of the document. You're also trying to find out whether their translations currently exist. In many cases, some of these key, critical, or vital documents maybe have already been translated. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just didn't know they existed, or they're sitting on someone's desktop, on someone's computer, or in someone's folder, and no one really knew about. So once you dig a little deeper, ask these questions, perhaps maybe you don't have to translate 20 documents, maybe just 5 of them, because the other 15 are already done. So you get to find out the length of the document. The other thing is that some of these documents, let's say you're mandated to do 15 languages, but they exist already in 4 languages. So that's good information to have, just to know that you're a third of the way there almost for that particular document. So you want to find out if they're already translated into which languages. Does it meet the criteria of what you're trying to accomplish in terms of where you want to be eventually? And also of critical importance is what type, does a source file of the document exist? And or a live file, and which file format is it in? That I'll dig a little deeper. What that means is that it's usually to get a document translated, you want to get a document in its file format that you can get in there and change the text, like a Microsoft Word file or a PowerPoint or an Excel. If you have a PDF file, anything that's image-based, you pretty much have to reinvent the format sometimes. So you want to see if anybody owns or who owns the original document. You're better off dealing with the original document that you can edit freely, or you can send to a translator. They could work within that format instead of reinventing the wheel every single time. So these are the details you want to start compiling, and there could be much more. These are just starting points. But to give you a sense, to start creating a list of some sort, to see how long this list is and how big of an endeavor you have in front of you. So I simply just threw in a couple of these items that we talked about into a little simple table format. And the list could be endless, depending how many documents you have. So what with the little piece of information that I've collected so far, based on what we just talked about, I have the title of the document, so a brief description of what you found during your surveying, a page count to give you a sense of the size, word count for purposes of how long it'll take to translate or how much it's going to cost you. And when was the document last revised? That's important to have so that everybody's in agreement that this is the latest version of this particular document that should be translated sooner or later. And then who owns it? So if you want to go back and have questions about the content, you know where to go to. Or if you have questions about, can you give me this document in a different file format, or any issues you may have, or who it should go back to once it's translated, who should be in charge of actually disseminating the document once it's in translation, or who's in charge, who disseminates the English one. So that's sometimes is extremely helpful. And then the last column I just threw in there, how many languages does this document already exist in? And I just made up this data, 2 languages, 1, and the longer document I put none, because that's usually the case. No one wants to touch a 20-page document. So for translation. So this is just a quick, simple table that you can produce as going through this exercise to get a sense of how much you have in front of you to do, and in terms of identifying what types of vital documents you have in front of you. So then, once you have your list, the next question is, what do you do first? Which one of these documents is more important than the other? Which one is more vital than the other one? And you can define which way to go in so many different ways. And I threw here about 5 different concepts for you to consider in identifying which ones you should consider going first. It could be a combination of these factors. It could be one that's really more important than the other. So the first one is consider the frequency of the document that it comes in contact with LEP service users. So if it's a document that's everywhere, that's perhaps maybe I go back to my example of an enrollment or a registration form, like someone needs to complete an input form or an intake form, that's something you may want to consider pretty quickly to get translated, because that's going to touch a lot of people. Some of the examples I have here are forms, flyers, your informational brochures. If you want to have, just the community learn about what you offer, then you may want to find the most informative brochure you have about what you do and have that translated. The other thing you may want to consider in identifying what gets translated first is what I've described here as any documents that are linked to pre-established deadlines. Again, what I wanted to say is that if you know something is coming up in the next few weeks, and it's critical that you get information out before that time arrives, then maybe that's the pressure point that you should be considering. Silly example. Halloween is a month away, and if you want, a certain community to get together and have an event and promote a get-together for kids to have costumes, then you may want to translate that sooner, because Halloween is a month away. So think about that, of upcoming events. I have examples, periodic or seasonal communications. If you have a newsletter that goes out every 4 months, and the next scheduled newsletter is due at the end of October, I guess, it isn't the same example. You may want to consider that to be translated before anything else. So it's whether or not things are linked to deadlines or dates or times is something that may be a driving force to decide what you translate first. Most visible. Those communications that are most visible. Examples here are signage. We talked about signage, and whether or not that are the most conspicuous and most visible communications that you have. If you have LEPs coming to your sites, you want to have signage. That's an easy thing to do, and have translated, and those documents are good, those signs are good for a long time. And then websites. I mean, we can get into the conversation of websites, so that'll be a couple more hour panel. But that's something that should be also on your list, just in the front burner or back burner, because that is something that nowadays is most frequently visited, are websites, and that's where people go to get information. So that can be important for you. And then lastly, or two of the last items, is the size of the document. The smaller the size, in theory, the faster, easier, and less least expensive, least inexpensive way to get those documents translated is the way to go. So maybe you want to get the small ones out of the way and be effective and be cost efficient in doing so. So size could be something you may want to consider. Translating a 10-word document is much different than translating a 500-word document. So that's something to keep in mind. And lastly, and this is maybe very important for many of you, is policy. Any documents that are driven by policy. that tell users of your service what their rights are, where to go, what to do, where to complain. All those things may be important for you, and maybe that's what gets translated first. So that's what I'm highlighted as the policy pieces. So some of those you can combine and come up with your own criteria in terms of what is the most important based on frequency and policy, or deadlines and size, or most visible and policy. So take your pick of those items and see. You'll start seeing what becomes important for you. Again, the criteria used for your agency may be different than an agency, another agency within city government. And again, there's a quick little output list of a sample of the priority list. And again, I threw in again the title of the document, the word count, the page count, revision date, and just simply added a column of priority. Whether it's high, medium, or low, you can come up with 1 to 5, 1 to 10. I mean, it's really up to you what works for you. These are just guiding points for you to consider, to come up with just simple list, just like this. And again, we haven't even started to talk about translation or cost, but it gives you a sense of how much you have to do. Of course, one thing that perhaps everybody's asking about is what did I miss? It's cost and resources. And that's something that obviously you need to consider and see what your budget is and what you can do with what you have. So that, again, is something you have to consider based on your circumstances. But I just want to point out that this is an ongoing process. You're not going to translate all your vital documents overnight. And so if you're able to identify the vital documents, prioritize them in a way that makes sense to you and is the most effective for you, then you're on a good way of, you're headed in the right direction. And I'm going to whiz through these last few slides. I'm running out of time.
Take your time.
Oh, okay.
Just take your time.
I got some signs. Okay. So the next thing is, once you have this list, right, and you know what you want to get to and what you have to do, the other thing you want to consider is to begin to come up with a way to track what you're doing and to archive what you're doing. This has a lot of advantages, and it's something that we all forget to do. We get into the reaction mode of getting something translated, getting it out, getting it in 14 languages, and then 2 months from now we do another one. We go through another one of those drills. A year from now, we have a similar document that we did last year, and we forgot we did it or we can't find it. So there are advantages for being a little organized and thinking through how best to organize your translation efforts. So tracking and archiving is something you just want to think through a little bit and see how best it'll work for you. It allows for an easy listing of your agency's translated documents. So at any given moment, if someone like I don't know, the feds or something come down and they ask, what have you translated, last year? You'll be able to quickly report back, we did 20 documents. This is our list, and this is these are the languages and so forth. So it's important to maintain that information. It identifies you could also use this tool to identify who owns the document. Once again, some of these documents come from different colleagues of ours within the same agency, or the office down the street, or the office upstairs or downstairs. So you could always go back to them and see whether they have updates, whether or not there are other documents coming your way for translation or that should be translated. You could also identify who did the translation in your little tracking system. And this could be a spreadsheet. It can be as simple as a spreadsheet. Again, as you can tell, I'm pretty big with Excel spreadsheets and keeping information organized. But it also, you can also, was it translated by someone within the agency? Was it contracted out? Who did it? And that's important to know, so you can always go back to in case you need to for any issues or updates. You can also list when it was done. Archiving, if you're organized in a way where you know where the translations live on a server or on a folder, you can go back and recycle the translations. You can go back and quickly get them if someone asks for the Russian version of Form 2W3C. You'll be able to find it quickly and not have to ask around, who was it that worked on this last year? I think you translated it. Where did you put it? What did we call it? Or where does it live? So organizing yourself, putting it on some place, in some folder that works for you will save you some headaches down the road. I may have touched on this previously. It also expedites the translation of documents that have been updated. So if you see a document that comes up a year later and you did it last year, you don't have to possibly translate the whole thing again. You can track back to see whether or not you can reuse what you did last year. Sometimes there's simple updates, a date, a signature, a telephone number has been updated. So that'll save you time and it'll save you money to make sure you just update what was done last year, but you need to be organized in order to be able to find it and where to go to find it. So all that reduces, obviously, cost and time. How do you do something like this? I touched on a simple spreadsheet, just another list of items that where things are stored and who owns them. For those of you that are more driven by technology and can mingle with databases and access and that type of stuff, that's even better, because that'll allow you to do much more and maneuver that information, those lists, how many words you translated, how many words went into Chinese, all these things you can output with easy reports using databases. And I list Microsoft Access as an option that sometimes comes with our Office suite at work, so consider that. Some of the things that, the headers and top of the columns, if you do a tracking sheet, whether it's a spreadsheet or a database, some of the things you may want to consider just to collect as you're going through this process is, as I mentioned previously, contact information, like who it came from, what office, and their contact information. Document information, you want to get a name to this document so we all call it something. We could all find it later if we needed to, and the length if that's of interest. And who did the translation, whether it's internal, external. If you want to add a field about cost, just to get a sense, if you want to start keeping track of how much you're spending in translation, this is an easy way to do it as well. Just tack it to the record of the translation job that you've created somewhere and just add a field, cost. And you can run reports, you can add numbers up, and at any given time have a good sense of what's been invested or spent on this. Attaching these projects that I'm talking about, or these document translations, with a number, a tracking number, a job number, is probably an easy way to go as well. At the translations unit in New York City, we're up to number 20,756. So we've translated over 20,000 jobs, and it's a nice number to see. It goes higher and higher, but it also it shows the work that you've done. It's easy to find, and you can always go back and look things up by the number. Going back to the archiving piece, so you also want to be organized when you save the translation. So I have an example there of something you may want to consider. So you get a file, and let's say it's called, what did I call it? Invite for a winter meeting. So you get a file from somebody that's called invite for winter meeting, and you have to translate that into whatever language you need to. Once you create the translated files, so not only do you now have the English file somewhere, you have like 5 other files, 1 for each language. Obviously name them the same thing. You want to maybe add a couple things to the file naming convention. You want to put SP for Spanish or ES for Spanish. You want to put maybe the date it was done, which is why there's a date at the end of the file name. Before the file name, I added 201 as a project number. So you can do this a lot of different ways. So if you have the 5 different files, it'd be 201 invite for winter meeting / KO for Korean _ and then the date it was done. So you can get really creative. These are just ideas for you to take back and see whether it'll help down the road. It really will. And it's not much effort to just get a little organized with your file naming convention. And then who should do this, right? I mean, all this work that I'm talking about, make it sound easy, but it's actually somebody has to do it. It depends on who currently is involved with translation in your agency, either by default or by accident. And I'm sure it's many of you who play that role in some capacity. So whatever works for you and your system and your agency is something that probably fall within your portfolio to just start creating a list. And it just benefits all at the end. And if you don't have anybody in your agency that's the point person or someone that you run to for a translation, then that's a different conversation. It's probably a good starting point is to have someone help coordinate the efforts for your agency. And as a bonus step, so this is taking it above and beyond what I've been talking about so far. As a bonus step, you may want to also take a look at the documents you're translating and make sure they are language access ready. And what that means is that make sure that the document is practical and that it works for the LEP community. And I have a couple of examples, because sometimes that's better to show the example than for me trying to explain. Basically, it's either adding text or subtracting text to a document that's going into translation that'll be much more effective for LEP readers and users. So here's an example. The flyer on the left is a document, let's assume, that came to us for a translation, and it says what it says. So there's an event coming up, it has a location, it has a time, it has somewhere to go to get more information. And typically we don't ask, we just process. So we'll get that document, we'll have it translated, and we're done with it. We've got, check off the list, it's translated into 10 languages. But it wouldn't hurt to just make a couple tweaks to that source text so that once it's in translation, it gives the LEP individual just a little more information or guidance on what to do. So the version on the right with the red text is something that you may or may not work, but it's your call to make, is if you add the text on the right in red and you get that version translated, it tells the reader in the foreign language much more. It's much more helpful. And so basically what it's saying is that, assuming this is in a foreign language, so I'm reading this in the foreign language and it's telling me to go to a website, but if I go to the website, it's going to be in English. But if I know it's already in English because the flyer says English only, then perhaps I can get someone to help me out to go to the website to read it to me in English, as opposed to me getting excited, going to the website and not being able to read it because it's in English. But the flyer now tells me that if I go, it will be in English. Or if I can't get online for whatever reason, maybe there's a phone number you could add on the translated version, and that you've set up beforehand to take in these phone calls. And let's say you have the over-the-phone service available, so when they call you, you can connect the dots and get the service that you need to overcome that language barrier. And then more importantly, and I think we forget to do this a lot, when we have a flyer and we're getting it translated, the point is that we want them to come to an event. And if I get a flyer that's translated, but it doesn't tell me that if I go, there'll be interpretation services, then I probably won't go. Because I'm going to have the same issue and same problem if I show up. Who's going to help me to understand what's happening? So adding a simple line, but this also assumes you've made your preparations and you've had interpreters prepared for your event that you're organizing. So adding a line, interpretation services will be available. If that indeed is true, is much more effective, and you're going to see your attendance rate increase dramatically, because as an LEP individual reading this, knowing you're going to have supports there for me when I attend, I'm in, because I want to learn more about this program, and I want to be there, and I know someone's going to be there to help me. So that's an example of making a document language access ready. Another example, very briefly, is sometimes we get into creating a lot of form field letters, a lot of letters that have mail merges, and you connect them with other databases, and you have a long list of individuals, and you drop in specific information. That's very helpful and useful on the English side of things, but when you get into translation, it can be a little tricky. And sometimes it doesn't work with the tools you have in place to do these mail merges. So sometimes modifying and making the letter a little more generic is easier for you, it's easier for the translator, and it just makes a lot more sense for the LEP recipient of this translated document. So what the transition that has taken place from the document from the left to the right is that instead of having a form field that will drop in a specific date depending on the date you print the letter, which will be in English, you're now giving the date a little more generic, just dropping the day specifically and just listing the month and the year. You get that translated, assuming you get the letter out that month, of course, right? And you're also not making it as personalized. In the English, you're going to have a name that drops in there based on whatever data you've connected to. But on the right, we're simply going to go with Dear Parent, and that works perfectly fine. Okay, you don't have to see, Dear Mrs. Smith or Jane Smith, just Dear Parent. That works absolutely fine. And then in the English version, on the left, there's another form field that appears that's to drop in the child's name. And so that, again, if it doesn't work with, in Chinese or Korean or other languages, just change the text a little bit so that it becomes much more generic. And again, you get your point across. The recipient the LEP recipient of the translation of this document will understand that it's intended for them. It was sent out in the month of January, and it's about their child. So these are things you may want to consider, and I describe that as a bonus step when you're going through this process of identifying vital documents. It doesn't hurt just to scan it, putting yourself in the shoes of an LEP recipient of this document, and just seeing things from their perspective. We'll do little tweaks like that go a long way. So we've done all these things, and now this happens. Everything gets translated, right? So, like I said, we're going to talk much about the actual translation process itself. It's everything beforehand and afterhand, so everything's translated, right? So let's move on. And then the next thing, and the last thing, is making sure you let everybody know that these translations exist. You've gone through this entire process. You've gone through the exercise of doing the due diligence to find out what should be translated. You've prepared the document to make it language access ready. You've dealt with the vendors and translators and all involved with that, and you have your documents in translation. Now you want to make sure that it's out there, because you'd hate to have all that work done and no benefits from all that effort and energy that it took to get this far. So getting the word out is something that we should address and think about once everything in the world has been translated, at least in your world, has been translated. So the distribution or the dissemination of translated documents. So this happens in several ways, right? So you can have a document that is translated, what I describe here as hard copy or a printed version. So let's talk about that for a second. So you have a document that's translated, it's in paper form. You want to think of every single way you can to get this document into the hands of where it should be, and not in your filing cabinet, and not in your drawer, and not on your desk. So you want to make sure that you send all the language versions of the communication along with the English to everybody you need to send it to, or who needs it, or who knows where it should be placed, or knows where it could make contact with the users of the readers of the document. Another option that I've seen is, which is less recommended, but it's also something you can consider, is sending the English out and making that widely available, but on the English itself, in the foreign languages, letting individuals know where they can get the translated version, that actually translated versions of this document exist, and where to go to get them. Okay, so what I envision is an English document, and at the very bottom in 10 or 14 or 6 languages saying go to this website or call this person or go to this place for a translated version of this document, and that would be in the foreign languages. So again, that promotes, because what happens sometimes, even if you send out English documents and 10 versions in translation to another island, for example, it could be that the English one is the only one being distributed to the communities, and that those translations actually never get there. But if you have the English going out with a little reminder that translations exist, go get them here, it's just another way to make sure that the word gets out that the translations exist. If you happen to know beforehand the language preference of individuals, if that goes back to our, something we touched on earlier, data. If you're collecting data, whether it's home language, preferred language, either written or oral, if you happen to have that, you can proactively and automatically send the foreign language version to the individual, because they prefer to receive it in Spanish or whatever language. So that's if you have the data. And then post online. Once you have a landing site on the website, make sure that translation lives online as well. I mean, again, you want to make it go out as many different avenues as you possibly can. That's the reason why you did all the work to get it translated to begin with. If we're talking about soft copy delivery, which means via email or electronic dissemination, so not the printed copy. So if you're talking about email or soft electronic mail, again, you want to send out the English email to everybody, all your listservs, anybody who is interested or is on your list to receive this, along with the translated versions. So don't just send out the English. I mean, if you have the files, attach them to the email, send them somehow, but get them out there via email. Again, similar to the previous slide, if you're only sending the English out, send a multilingual message that'll direct anybody who comes across that email to know where the translations exist. Oh, they live online. Click here and you'll see the Spanish, or click here, you'll see the Chinese. So think about making sure you cover all your points when it comes to that. And lastly, again, post online, which goes without saying. So this will be the last slide. So this talks about making sure that you make these translations available on the website. And again, kind of going back to what I talked about earlier with this user-prompted or agency-prompted documents, it's something for you to think about where they should live online. Like what sites do users, whether they're English-speaking or LEPs, what sites are most clicked on? Where do they visit? Do you have a place on your site that's easily remembered, and that you can post your translations that are user-prompted, right? And then you also want to have a place that you have these agency-prompted documents. So again, those instances when you have documents that only you or your colleagues know when to use and when it's necessary, those should live somewhere online as well, and they should be accessible to staff. Staff should know that they exist and where to go, right? Otherwise, if they're just posted online and no one knows about it, again, it's as if I just have them in my drawer and they don't exist. So creating awareness and training people in terms of where they live is important. And ultimately, what you're going to end up with is you're going to have, at the end of the day, you're going to have places online where you have this one-stop translation site where your list is going to grow of all these vital documents. So from that long list of vital documents you created, and then you have your approach, which is, you know, the shortest, the cheapest, the most effective, whatever criteria you use, you add them on to these websites, and then at the end of the day, you're going to have a long list of documents, and it's going to continue to grow and grow and grow. You promote those sites, people know they're there, people know to go back to that site to get additional translations, if there are any. So it's a win-win for everybody. So that's kind of pretty much the process that I wanted to just share with you, for you to think about. Some of those things are easier than others, but I think that if you just start somewhere, that's a victory in itself. So that's it.
Great. Thank you, Kleber. That was awesome. I think that a lot of agencies just don't even know where to start. And you just laid out a really helpful blueprint for people just to get a sense of what may be required in terms of manpower and resources and time. And, you know, just understanding a lot of the factors that need to be considered when endeavoring to translate a vital document. Just one note, there isn't really a clear definition of vital documents as far as I know in federal law, but yeah, okay, good. Yeah, I mean, not good, but good that I wasn't wrong about that. But yeah, so there's some guidance, but to contrast that, even though Hawaii's law is very similar and based on federal law, Hawaii has actually endeavored to define vital documents. So you can look at our statute or talk to me and see what we've done in the state of Hawaii in terms of getting guidance on what a vital document is. But you have a sense, you know, if it involves like applications, rights, denials, that kind of thing. If it's a really important issue, it's likely a vital document, and you need to go through the process of prioritizing. You can't do it all at once, and as you can see, it's a process. But you know, let's get started. So, okay, well, we'll move on to Melody, and she can talk about the translation efforts of our state judiciary.
Okay, good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Melody Kubo. I'm with the Hawaii State Judiciary. We are the office. My office is tasked with coordinating language access efforts for the judiciary statewide. I'm actually really happy that what Kleber just said is basically what we did at the judiciary. But let me remind you that 5 years ago, we probably didn't have very many or any multilingual documents on our website. 5 years ago, the OLA invited the Department of Justice to come and keynote their annual conference, and so we decided we better ramp up. So one of the first things that we did, was create a welcome banner in languages so that at least it would appear that we are welcoming people in their language. Okay, so joking aside, no, really, we did that. And we only did it in First Circuit because she was only coming to Oahu. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is you can take these small steps, and eventually, after she left and we found some money, we printed these banners for every courthouse statewide. So take a baby step, right? Do what you need to do, and then you can expand it, okay? So in preparation for the Department of Justice lady, we also started our language ID card pilot. So this is kind of, for those of you who think this is too much, we got the language ID card text from the State Civil Defense Office. We took a portion of their emergency ID cards. We reformatted it in Word. I mean, this is our welcome banner. It's beautiful, yeah? Okay. We reformatted it in Word, and then we actually like Xeroxed it on color paper, cut it with a paper cutter, and we bought these little holders that would go in our courthouses, and they look just like this. Okay, not that I'm very proud of it, but it's something that we were able to do quickly, less than $100, okay? And what we did was, to promote that, was we got a little featured news item on our website. It said, featured news, hey, we have these language ID cards. And it linked to a list of languages, and we had instructions that were translated by volunteer translators. So I would have, several different translators in each language submit to me, and we picked. And then you click on the link, and you would get to the language ID card. You could print it out, bring it to the court. Okay, This pilot project, like I said, was less than $100. We did it in a few weeks. It took mostly staff time, okay? That was in 2012. So then in 2013, we moved forward. We started our sidebar languages list. So we have a list of languages on our website in language that LEP people can click on to access documents. So in this pilot, when they clicked on that list, they got to this. It was a list of it was a statement that you have the right to an interpreter, and then click this list link and you will get to a language ID card, and they were all listed on one page because this was a PDF document. We activated links and it linked to the language ID card. Okay, so that also costed zero. It costed zero. It just costed us time to format that PDF, and our webmaster put it up on our website, okay? So then fast forward to 2014, we decided we're going to reorganize our website and put everything that relates to language access in one place for the first time. We created our language access tab. That was done by our website host vendor person, Hawaii. I think a lot of state agencies use this vendor, Hawaii Internet Consortium, something like that. So they created the tab for us. We told them what we wanted on the drop-downs, and we're able to organize that. But when you click on that language access tab, you will get to our language access page. This is where our webmaster organized this page for us. So it starts with the policy. It goes into a list of our services. It lists all these documents in English. Where the translation's available, there's a link. What we did was each translated document, we PDF'd in our office. And then that's the link that we go to, so that the cost of this was really fairly minimal, and it was actually more time in our office spending reformatting the PDF, or taking the text out of the translation and formatting it as a PDF so that we could put it online. Okay, so the one cost that we did have was our language ID cards, and it was primarily because we were going to print them and distribute them in the courthouses as well as online. So actually the cost to reformat the language ID card for online was zero. We paid about $2,000 to have the translations reviewed and edited.
This conference is being ended due to inactivity. All callers will be disconnected.
Okay, my time is up. Thank you very much. No, just kidding. So we actually paid for a bunch of small translations together that costed us about $2,100. We paid another $7,000 for the holders and printing thousands of those cards, which is why I want to remind you, if you haven't already taken some, please help yourself. They're at the Judiciary table. We printed thousands, and we really want to get them out there. So if you think you can use them, feel free to take a stack of any and every language that you think you might need. We also have one in English that is generic, and you can write in your language name. Okay, so that costed maybe about $8,000 all told. Most of that was for printing, like I said. That was pretty much the basic cost. But other than that, these kinds of the content that we had on how to request an interpreter, how to use, this is not my content, but this content was done by another agency, office in our judiciary. But how to use an interpreter, tips on going to court, self-help centers. We've reformatted that content out of the brochures as a simple PDF form, and then we link to that. So our webmaster worked very hard in helping us to conceptualize how the website would be organized so that when you go through your website, it's very clear, it's very linear. It's easy to access that information. Okay. I just wanted to say, at the same time as we created our language ID, language access tab, we also created multilingual web pages. So from the left-hand sidebar of our homepage, they can click on any language, and it's in language, the language names. You click on your language, you'll get to a page that has all the translated documents. Okay, so in one click with no English, the LEP person can get to resources, right? In one click from the language access tab from our homepage, the English-speaking advocate, attorney, family member can get to resources, okay? The way that our website is set up is so easy to access the information. That's one of the reasons why we were told that we won the #1 Top Tech Award this year. And our website was up against, I gotta just share this, our website won against other websites like LA Superior Court. They have an avatar. They have a Siri. They created a Siri. I don't know what they're called, but they created a Siri for their website. Okay, our little simple click, 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 we won over that. I can't believe it. But I just want to see, so it doesn't need to be high tech. It doesn't need to be super duper. Okay, it just needs to be functional. So put yourself in the place of the person who's going to be using your website, and think of how they're going to access information, and try to just make that visible, public, and easy, right? Because the goal of all of this is really not to have the super duper avatar website, but really to make sure that people get the information they need from you in a timely manner that they can understand, right? So that's really all I had to say about that. But I'm more than happy to answer questions. And by the way, that last piece with the language ID, the language access tab and the content and our website multilingual web pages actually costed nothing, except it costed us about 2 weeks solid of my entire staff helping me reformat the PDFs, and our webmaster figuring out how to lay out those pages. But for those of you who are state agencies, if you use the same website host as we do, you can actually cut and paste in characters into your web pages. So it's doable. It's all doable. Okay? Okay, and that's really all I had, so thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Melody. That was awesome. I love what you just concluded to say. It's doable. And it sounds like you did it with pretty limited resources, but yet you still got the award for the top website. So, to me, that demonstrates how putting some thought, a little brain work, and consultations, and just thinking about how are we going to present this in a way that's meaningful, not necessarily with Siri talking to you or the Google Translate buttons or all these bells and whistles. Might look good and techies may be impressed, but what does it mean to the LEP public? And it seems like you took that into account and produced a top-notch product with limited resources. So thank you.
One thing I forgot to say, sorry.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to add was when you do multilingual documents on your website, it's a quick and easy way to do data collection as well. So in addition to having our staff log all their encounters with limited English proficient people that they talk to in the course of their day, we also record data on website hits. How many people click on our language ID cards by language? How many people click on our in-language brochures by language, or go to that in-language page by language? So we actually get some really good data on who's actually looking at this stuff and who's using this stuff that we wouldn't be able to get any other way.
So yeah, that's great. So next time DOJ comes asking,
Yeah,
you
don't
can say,
anymore.
hopefully not anymore, but for all of you other agencies, once you get a good website going, you have a reliable source of data, and you can say, hey, we are collecting data, and these are how many clicks we got on this language or that language. So that's awesome. Francois, you wanted to use this?
He's going to.
Oh, okay. Okay, so in the meantime, I have a couple questions that I think Melody and Kleber can answer. It won't take too long, I don't think. How do you handle the translation of waivers, and are these uniform? And how do you handle translation of individual specific information on the waiver form, and what's the process?
Go ahead.
So I'm trying to get a sense why a waiver form would be any different than any other form. Do we know why? No?
I don't know,
Okay,
but,
okay. So-
but it seems they're very concerned about waivers. And
So
Great, perfect, thanks.
I'm sorry? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I think what we're getting at is documents that don't only have boilerplate text, but also have very specific content, particular to a case or an incident. Yeah, those are definitely challenging. I mean, there are There are a few tricks you can do, but ultimately you still need to address the fact that there's very specific content that you can't prepare for, you can't pre-translate, you can't do anything about it. There are different ways. I mean, I've seen some people being able to, in some cases, list all the different possible options into 4 or 5 checkboxes, if you can, right? So if there is a limited set of options that exist, which is difficult and rare, but if that can happen, then you create a form with all the boilerplate text, and you list all the 5 options, and then all that's required is someone to check one of the 5 boxes that applies to the case or the incident or the situation. But more realistically, it probably is very specific and individualized content that you can't prepare for, and that's a challenge. So one of the things that we do is and the other challenge here is those documents need to be processed pretty quickly as well, I assume, right? So you don't have the luxury to say, oh, you'll get the translation next week. So that's very difficult to do. So if you're able to, and I can't speak to that we're able to do this either, but is getting the majority of the document in translation, and then just worrying about those small pieces and having a contractor or vendor or someone on standby to address those, whether they be on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. It depends how much your timeline allows you to turn those things around. No, but that's very challenging because the variety of the options that could be listed in any one of these forms can vary immensely. It also depends on who writes them. We all have different writing styles. And I can write the same thing as you can, but we'll write it differently, and it will require individual and specific translation at that moment. There is no quick answer, unfortunately. There are things that you can get you halfway there or 3/4 of the way there, but it really depends perhaps on the frequency of the volume of these documents that you get and how much time you have to turn them around, and based on that, come up with the best solution you can.
Okay, I think with that, unless Melody has something to add.
I did just want to add, because we are starting to translate court forms, like change of plea form, for example. That is mostly boilerplate, but there is a part where you can say other, and then there's lines. Okay, so one thing that we try to do is we have if they're in court, the interpreter can sight translate that, right? If not, then we can make that service available to them, perhaps after their court case, so that they can call in or maybe make an appointment and we'll have it orally translated for them. Because some of the customized text, you're not going to be able to get it translated in writing. So we're trying to figure out ways, like you are, to address those situations where there needs to be individualized information or customized orders that may not always be able to be immediately translated. The other thing is, we're a state agency, we're in a fiscal crunch. We have limited resources, so we have to be always mindful of being fiscally prudent, because we would hate to be spending all our money in this one pot and not have enough money to pay for interpreters halfway through the year. So we also, like you, struggle a little bit with balancing priorities, and some of that is not within my office's hands, but we do try a lot to make sure our staff has resources and options.
Just add one thing that in another scenario, in another world, I guess, talking about report cards and how report cards, there's a template of it where you can translate it and get it in multiple languages. And then you have grades, of course, which are numbers or letters. And then you have teacher comments. Right? And the teacher comments are very specific as well. I have seen actually a list of 130 different comments that a teacher can choose from, and they're numbered 1 through 130. And there's, in addition to a parent getting the report card, they get this list of 130 comments in multiple languages. So the teacher just codes the comment on the report card. So if they put code 4 and 5 and 27. The parent could go to this additional document, find their language, and see what 4, 5, and 27 are. So that's a creative way. That's not the best, it's not the ideal, but it gets the point across.
Well, that's impressive to me that you were able to translate 130.
I mean, they're short. They're like, your child's fantastic. Your child is great.
Doesn't
your
play well with others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so with that, we'll move on to Francois, and then I think we'll have some time for other questions for the whole panel.
Okay, good afternoon. My name's Francois Miller, and I'm a self-employed, I specify independent translator.
A little closer.
Is it? Okay. Okay. Is it better now? Yeah. So I was saying I'm a self-employed independent translator, and I've been working mostly on all kinds of legal documents, but today we're focusing on vital documents, vital records, and I am certified, accredited by the French Consulate General in San Francisco, and I'm also a court interpreter registered with the state of Hawaii. There's a couple of pointers I've got on the screen, and then we'll go over a couple of sample documents that I've redacted, so there's no personal names on them, to show you the kind of work I've done. The main thing is always translate from an original document if you possibly can. Sometimes I'll do an estimate on a scan that people send by email, but I always have to see the original later when they come to pick up the translation. And make no changes to the original text, and you'd be surprised that I've had requests where people ask me to change a name on a document, or even that they didn't like the job description that was written down. So it's scary. The third thing is to translate everything and possibly create a mirror image of the original. I'm talking about documents that haven't been pre-translated by the judiciary or officially translated. And translate even items that aren't filled out, so it makes a long translation. And also I do use footnotes to explain acronyms or country-specific terms. And also I unnumber each translation. And I use a year sequence plus a number for each translation. I stamp, date, and sign them. There's a certified stamp I have that I'll show you. And then I mention my phone number or email on the translation. So we'll look at some samples here. The first sample is a certificate of a live birth in English that I translated into French. So this is the standard state of Hawaii that some of you recognize. This is a shorter form. Some of the older forms are much longer that were issued previously. And this is the translation. You can see how it kind of mirrors the original, but it is on 2 pages because I don't want it to be illegible and I need room to be able to stamp it on the back. I redacted the names, of course. And then on the back of the document, you've got my statement that certifies the translation that I've signed it. And then on the side, I put my stamp with my address and phone number. And underneath, I put a little stamp saying I'm accredited with the French Consulate in San Francisco. And on the bottom, you'll see a little post-it that I usually put on the original. And that has a number, the translation, and the date. Okay, now we've got the exact, one advantage is since I work in both languages, I get to see the terminology of a French birth certificate that was issued in Tahiti. It's not very legible. Unfortunately, my scan isn't ideal here. But and there's a lot of handwriting that you have to kind of decipher, but I'm getting good at that now. This form is pretty complex, but it actually breaks down pretty easily. And then on the translation, you've got, I don't know how you can read. Yeah, you can read it. Okay. See, everything's translated, and then on the bottom, I did mention that I was on the judiciary's list because it gives some credibility. And then there's this statement, an oath saying that I'm fluent in both languages, which is apparently sufficient in the U.S. And then there's a translation number below and my email address and phone number. So those are the basic ideas. I've still got a few minutes, so we can go over a couple other documents. I wanted to mention something that's very important. It's the apostille, which is a document that is issued by the Lieutenant Governor's Office in Hawaii to certify that the document that's issued by a public authority is authentic. And this simplifies the paperwork in the foreign country because there's an international convention that recognizes these signatures. And I use the convention, which has a text in French that's official, to translate each number that's written on the side here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I don't know if that would work in some other languages, but luckily in French, we had an official version of the treaty. So here's the translated version. And I followed the exact terminology in the treaty, which wouldn't necessarily be the way I would have translated everything. And on the very bottom, I stamped and signed it. But I don't normally, I use the same number because the apostille goes with an original document, so I don't change the number of the translation. And then here we have another interesting document, a little creepy, but it's a burial transit permit. And this one, you'll be able to see that it really is a mere translation. So that's the English version that you see online there. And then the French right here is very close to the original. And then on the bottom here, this is an original. I don't usually have these copies because they don't return to me, but on this copy it was certified by the French consular agency here in Honolulu to verify that I was the person that signed the document. It doesn't attest to the validity of the translation, by the way, because it states that it only legalizes the signature. But it does give a lot of weight to the translation when they have to give it to a French agency in France. So that's an example of... and then finally, sometimes I'm given a document and it looks horrible when I have to give an estimate on the cost, but I was lucky recently to find, I had translated this vital statistics unit birth certificate from the state of Texas, and as you can see, the form is pretty complex. Well, I actually found the exact same copy on my computer that I translated a few years ago, so that saved me a hell of a lot of time. And I didn't realize it when I made the estimate to the client, so, but see, and on the back I've stamped and certified it. I'm passing on the details, but this is a typical document that's really complex to do the first time, but on this one it became, you know, it was a good fortune that I found the exact same copy. Sometimes they're a little different, but it really helps to have a background document. So I really do save everything. So that's about it. I guess we can leave more time for questions that way. Yeah.
Okay, well, you just triggered one issue in my brain, and I wonder if maybe Michael could comment on it. Sorry, I put you on the spot, but and I remember this came up in a conference maybe a couple years ago. But you know, we're mostly focused on translating our English documents for our LEP community. But what about situations where an LEP client needs to access our government services via the use of a foreign document that needs to be translated into English? And I've heard of situations where the agency got in trouble for telling that LEP person to go get it translated on their own. So as a matter of providing meaningful access, I mean, I think this is a gray area, but perhaps, Michael, if you happen to have any insight on it, who would be responsible for the translation of that foreign document to access services here? So say they need to show proof their driver's license in another country to be able to do something here in the U.S. or to be eligible for some services. And it's just gobbledygook here. We don't know what it says. Who's responsible for paying for the translation of that document so they can meaningfully access the services here? Coming to like a federally funded agency here. Did I stump you? Okay. Okay.
And the other thing is that there are forms where we require the Honolulu client to fill. So let's say the form is translated.
Oh, wait, can we put you on mic? Yeah.
Yes, it's a very typical situation in our world because we pre-translate the form, for example, but that form needs to be filled in. So we translated it, let's say, into Vietnamese. The Vietnamese client fills in the areas where they're supposed to give the answers. It comes back to our office, and we send it through the client-specific translation category to get what the client wrote back into English. So it's a normal process for us. And with the several years ago, when the citizenship confirmation was required by feds some years ago, and there were some documents that were, let's say, in French or in Samoan, just to show that people are equivalent to, U.S. citizens and so on and so forth. We said that if they have difficulty providing the document in English, we will translate it for them, and we did that.
Okay, that I think is good. Melody, yeah.
I don't want to say too, like at the court, because we are just starting our court forms, and I'm expecting that we're going to get stuff in language. But currently, at the court, anybody can file a document, and as long as it doesn't have blood or liquid spatters on it, we have a no bounce policy. So people actually do submit written statements for their traffic ticket in another language. Sometimes it's in Japanese, and we have to deal with that because we won't bounce that. So we routinely will have to figure out ways to translate that. So we have processes for that internally.
And just similarly for us, so if anybody presents a foreign language document to us, it's our responsibility to translate it. I mean, we need to know what it says, so if they're filing a complaint or if there's documentation they're providing that's in another language, or if they file a complaint in another language, we translate it, so.
Okay, good. So you heard it here, that if your agency is presented with a foreign language document, you're really on the hook to do the translation yourselves. Otherwise, you're not providing meaningful language access. Okay, thanks. Okay, so I have a couple questions for, one for the judiciary and a few for Kleber, and then if you want to chime in, Francois. Does the judiciary recognize Hawaiian language and provide interpretation services as it does for foreign languages?
Oh, that's a very good question. So the short answer is yes, we recognize Hawaiian. The longer answer, Hawaiian is, as you know, one of our 2 official languages of our state. So of course we recognize that. We also recognize, however, that many people who speak Hawaiian also speak English, so they may not be the person who needs the interpreter. So we have had people that have come to the court who can understand the judge's questions in English, but prefer to answer in Hawaiian. And at that point, we will generally get an interpreter, but the interpreter is not necessarily for the Hawaiian-speaking defendant. It's generally for the judge, because the judge cannot make a decision without understanding what that person is saying. But we do have we do provide Hawaiian interpreters and Ihao and Hawaiian interpreters as needed in the courthouse. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so we're getting some really interesting questions with this, because now the lines are kind of blurred,
Yeah.
and then when you think about language access and sort of legal lineage that led to it, I mean, it's all about national origin discrimination, but, overthrow of Hawaiian Kingdom.
Realistically, the Hawaiian is not necessarily a Title VI issue.
Yeah.
It's maybe a different other issue, like a political issue. It may not be a language access issue. But in terms of providing, we do provide.
Yeah, and I think also, if you were listening about the history yesterday during the presentations, I mean, there was a very concerted effort to ensure that Hawaiian language, a Hawaiian language advocate, their presence was on our advisory council, and there's a mention of it in our statute and whatnot. So, as a matter of legislative intent, we want to recognize the value of the Hawaiian language, and I think everyone can kind of feel on board with that idea. Anyone have anything else to add to that? No, it's a unique Hawaii issue. Okay, so Kleber, one of your slides, you shared an event on a flyer that translated the text reading, parens, English only, or call a number, and then, quote, interpretation services will be available. So the question is, can you further explain this last sentence? How would you know the type of language services to make available at this event?
So, that, again, it depends on several factors. I mean, one of the things is perhaps where the event is taking place. Perhaps you have data language of the recipients of your service. Perhaps you have trends of who's appeared before, or where you're going to promote this event. But ultimately, that does assume that you have some idea of who may show up, and it also is going to prompt what languages that flyer is translated into. So you can still have this document translated in multiple languages, and just reassure yourself that you will have interpreters for some of the languages. So you would only be able to add that line to those languages where you've had made prior arrangements to have somebody there. It really depends on, like I said, where, when, who, background information, any inside knowledge, any community members who you know are actively involved or interested in this particular topic, and all those factors need to be assessed. There is no simple rule of thumb to know, X plus Y equals, Spanish. You really just need to consider all these factors. And then once you have a tracking record and you've been to this event and you've conducted this event once a year or every 6 months and seen who has shown up and who hasn't shown up, maybe that'll give you some idea of what to do for the next event as well.
Yeah, when you said tracking record, it made me think of data collection, and so it is a process. So I think that's good. I mean, our challenges in Hawaii are a little unique because we have a lot of languages that we're seeing more frequently, maybe than perhaps in New Mexico or New York, where you see a lot of Spanish or whatnot. And you kind of know you need to have a Spanish interpreter. But yeah, as you have the experience, you can just be ready.
And the other thing that a different version of that one line is to request interpretation services, please call this number by a certain date, some sort of RSVP, whether it's special accommodations or language services, so you know someone's coming, you can make those accommodations beforehand.
Yeah, and hopefully you'll see that in a lot of government agency flyers and outreach things. If, please contact this office 7 days in advance to make arrangements for language or ASL interpreter services. Okay, Kleber, are your vital documents proofed by another translator?
So I wasn't going to talk about translation, but now we're going to talk about the translation of these documents. So we either have in-house staff who does the translation of the documents for the Department of Education, and we have quality checks in place for everything that we do internally. For anything that's done externally with a contracted vendor that we've secured through an extensive RFP process, throughout that process, we made sure that they go through a specific quality check process, QC and proofreading, before they deliver anything back to us. So the two sources that we have for the two resources that we use for translation, whether it's internal or external, we have those quality checks in place.
Do you have anything to add, Melody? Or no? Okay. This is a question that also relates to oral interpretation. But if you have any thoughts, what do you do if your translation or interpretation is challenged or contradicted?
Wow.
Yeah. Ooh. Just a general.
So, my experience. Let's deal with one. Let's do a translation first. First of all, let's just make sure that we understand that this whole industry, this whole topic is very subjective, right? I always give an example, especially in languages like Spanish, where you can have a Spanish translation, give it to 10 different Spanish speakers, and give each one a red pen, and that document will be bleeding in red ink from all 10 people because everybody has a different way of translating a term. But at the end of the day, if we understand that this is subjective, right, we encourage people to give us feedback on our translations. The rare instance that we do have someone say, via email, I received a translation, it's horrible, it's disastrous. We want to see what you're talking about. Like, we want to follow up and make sure that you can specify for us what the issue is. A general comment that a translation is horrible is not sufficient and not helpful for anybody. So, and it's funny, every time we follow up with, can you just send us a copy, mark it up, and we'll take a look at it, we never hear from them again. They never come back. So it's either wasn't worth the effort to go through it, or they were just okay with it at the end of the day when it comes to translation. On the interpretation side, it gets a little trickier. And I think that for some languages, it depends on the intonation of where you're from what part of the world, and how it sounds. I always equate it to something that we can all relate to in English. As English speakers, I mean, people speak a little differently from different parts of the USA. The West Coast, the South, the East Coast, the Midwest, Hawaii. But we all understand each other. At the end of the day, we all can communicate. But there may be some instances where we just have to focus in or listen a little more just to make sure we understand, because one of us either speaks too fast or too slow, whatever the case may be, but we'll understand each other. But when we have concerns about the interpretation side of things, we have to take note that that's a possibility. That it wasn't that the interpreter was horrible or bad, it could be that they were just having a more difficult time in understanding what was being said. Now, if indeed there is an issue, and it can be articulated that, someone spoke for 10 minutes and the interpreter only spoke for 2 seconds, right? Something that extreme and that obvious is something that we'll address separately with that interpreter when the need arises. The other things with interpreters, besides just the quality of the transmission of the assignment, Also issues of tardiness. We talked about advocating or just being that bridge is a big issue, that finding that fine balance. I mean, we've seen, at least in New York City, a lot of interpreters getting into the advocate position, and that's really dangerous and not recommended, at least at our end. So those things could also be issues that we address, but outside of the quality of the interpretation, I guess.
Anything to add? Maybe.
You know, the thing that's hard in court is whenever there's an interpreter at trial, that is, if I was a criminal defense attorney, that's immediately an appealable issue, is to attack the competency of the interpreter, because with an incompetent interpreter, you don't get effective assistance of counsel. And that's constitutional right. So, you know, a lot of interpreted cases go up. Not a lot of them get overturned on appeal because the standards on appeal are very, very high. For the LEP person would need to prove that the outcome of the case would be different if they had gotten competent interpreting. One thing that we do with the judiciary, however, we are currently working on developing disciplinary rules that would address interpreters who are behaving unethically, or I call it behaving badly, not doing a good job, tardy, asserting that they speak a language they really don't have that language skill to be in court, that kind of thing. In the interim, what I encourage court staff and the public and the LEP users to do, if they are comfortable, is to contact my office, because even though we can't sanction interpreters, we can certainly do a lot of informal counseling. We can try to redirect and correct bad behavior. We can suggest that they might want to take their name off this language until they go back and do some additional training, that kind of thing. So we do take that seriously, quality, because we know that at the end of the day, the whole reason we're providing interpreters is to provide meaningful access. Without quality, you don't have meaningful access. Okay?
You know, as you were speaking, the expression came to me, garbage in, garbage out.
Something like that, yeah.
So, I mean, it might be easy to target the interpreter and say, that didn't make any sense, you know, you're a crappy interpreter. But, you know, maybe it was crap that they're interpreting and it was completely accurate. So just keep that in mind. And, you know, about this idea that, you know, what do you do when someone challenges it? You know, we have these mechanisms in place. We have a complaint process. I mean, Office of Language Access has a complaint process, which sadly isn't being used enough. Please complain. And I think a lot of these agencies have their own internal complaint processes. So I don't think anyone's going to say, don't provide constructive feedback. You know, please provide constructive feedback because we're on the business of improving. So please do that. And then also the point of, like, you know, there's so many different ways to write in English. I mean, how many times, you know, are you trying to put out a memo and you're working with 3 or 4 editors and it has to go through so many, and you're just dealing with one language. So there's just so many different styles and ways of expressing. So just keep that in mind too. It's, you know, it's easy to, you know, maybe pin the blame on the translator or the interpreter, but as Kleber said, right, get your documents in, get them translate. What did you say?
Language access ready, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, language access ready, is that what you said? Yeah. Or
even terminology. I mean, if you need to simplify terms or take a look at it in terms of plain English, which is another topic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's part of the language access, getting in language access ready is making sure that the content is easy to work with. There's not 20,000 acronyms without defining what they are. So those are things to consider.
If you have questions, Trina's our question collector, so you can bring them up to her as you go. Okay, we've got just 2 minutes, and we're working through all the questions the best we can. So I just want to take these 2 minutes to go back to some Fed-specific questions, if that's okay, and then we'll go into our 2:15 panel, if that's okay. But you guys stay still for now. Should an agency determine prevalent languages based on the specific population that agency serves? And I think that's an easy one for you to answer. Yes. So in case you didn't already garner that from the whole conference. Yeah, and that's part of what the data collection process is about. You find out who you serve, at what frequency, and you're going to use that to prioritize your efforts. Yeah. Eligibility. Okay, yeah, and that's a good point. We have that in our Hawaii state law. It's not just who you see and who you might have documented, because not everyone is going to be aware of your service, not everyone is going to feel comfortable going to it, but if they are eligible for your service, and we use that term in our law, eligibility, then you need to take that population into account. Yeah? Okay. Okay, this question I think relates to this panel. As a result of 9/11, our country did an assessment of the languages used in the United States and identified language pockets. Okay, this is singular, pockets. To what extent do we use National Language Service Corps in terms of registry and access to interpreters? Anybody?
No one?
So I'm a little familiar with this group, the National Language Service Corps. Is Lena here? We had someone who was affiliated with, I don't know if it was the Navy or the Army, but, sorry, Brandon was his name, but he came in and okay, and someone else. So I guess there's a volunteer group of interpreters that.
I know Loan Lee is here. Is she here? She's actually the local coordinator for the National Language Service Corps, which is a voluntary corps created by the federal government to create a cadre of interpreters and translators available to the government. And then when you get an assignment from them, they actually will pay you for that. But it's voluntary to sign up. They do training, they do screening, they do testing, and then they put you on a list. And if you're available to service, some of the assignments I've heard were people going, like Vietnamese-speaking people who went back with the group from Hawaii to bring back remains of servicemen from Vietnam. They do sometimes for visiting dignitaries while they're here. They may interpret for those people. They may translate documents. You know, we don't, in the court we have our own process for qualifying interpreters, but certainly if an interpreter has gone through that training and testing, we would certainly take a look at what they've done for National Language Service Corps in terms of whether we can accept some of that to qualify them for our program.
So I guess I would just note that for agencies, that perhaps you can look at them as a resource. If they're volunteer, that could help. So something to put in your toolkit. And then as to the first part of that question, has there been an assessment? If you recall Christine Stoneman's presentation this morning, she showed some mapping tools and different languages and the extent to which they're in in Hawaii and on the other islands. And then I think yesterday I mentioned that DBED has a report that's available on their website, which explains some of the characteristics, the LAP characteristics in the state. So there are tools. A lot of it is based on census reporting, but there's also been other research. So there's materials out there. If you go through the handouts, you can probably